My mother scrubbed their floors for 11 years, so when their son fell in love with me, his mother didn't just disapprove, she declared war. She humiliated me in front of 50 guests, slapped my mother, and swore we'd regret it. She had no idea. We'd be the ones writing her ending. If you love stories about betrayal, forbidden love, and karma that hits hard, hit subscribe now, because this story is about to take you somewhere you won't expect. My name is Ren Hollis, and before I tell you how a wedding gown, a stolen fortune, and a single slap changed everything, you need to understand where I came from. I grew up in the shadow of a mansion I didn't own, in a world that was never really mine. My mother, Della, spent 11 years polishing floors she'd never be invited to sit on, ironing shirts for a family that saw her as furniture with a heartbeat. And me? I grew up watching wealth through glass doors, close enough to touch it, far enough to know it would never be mine. The Ashworth estate wasn't just a house, it was a kingdom, and Margot Ashworth ruled it like a queen who trusted no one. But behind the marble floors and the ballroom chandeliers, there was a boy who didn't care about any of that. Callan. Callan Ashworth was the only person in that entire house who ever looked at me like I was somebody, not somebody's daughter. We were children then, hiding in the East Garden, trading secrets under the fig trees while our mothers worked and worried above us. He'd sneak me books from his father's library. I'd sneak him laughter he never got enough of at home. It wasn't love yet. It was something simpler, safety. And in that house, safety was rare. Years passed. I left for university, chasing a life that felt like mine, away from floors that weren't ours to walk freely. I studied design, built a life out of nothing but stubbornness and my mother's sacrifices. And when I came back, 24, changed, a little harder around the edges, I told myself I was only home to see her. I told myself I wasn't hoping to see him, too. But some things don't fade. They wait. The moment I saw Callan again, something in my chest cracked open, old and familiar, like a door I thought I'd locked for good. He wasn't a boy anymore. He carried his father's business now, his mother's expectations heavier on his shoulders than any of us realized. But when he smiled at me, that same crooked, unguarded smile from the garden, I knew nothing had really changed between us. Not really. What I didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that Margot already had a plan, a name already chosen for her son's future: Priscilla Vane. Daughter of an ally, heiress to an empire that would double the Ashworth fortune. Love had nothing to do with it. Legacy did. I didn't see the storm coming. I only saw Callan's hand brush mine at his family's charity dinner, an invitation that felt like hope. I walked into that house that night believing love might actually be enough. I had no idea I was walking straight into a war I hadn't even been told was declared. The charity dinner should have been the beginning of something beautiful. Instead, it was the moment I first felt her eyes on me, really felt them, like a blade pressed flat against my skin. Margot Ashworth didn't shout. She didn't need to. She simply watched me across that ballroom with a stillness that said everything her silence wouldn't. I remember thinking, she already knows. And somehow that terrified me more than if she'd screamed. For weeks after, Callan and I existed in stolen pieces. A phone call after midnight, a coffee that turned into 2 hours of conversation, a drive with no destination except away from everyone who might recognize us. It felt reckless and beautiful in the way forbidden things always do. I told myself we were just two old friends finding each other again, but my heart knew better. My heart had known better since we were children under that fig tree. Then came the day I understood exactly what kind of woman Margot was. She didn't come for me first. She went for my mother. I wasn't there when it happened, but Della came home that evening quieter than I'd ever seen her, her hands trembling slightly as she folded laundry that didn't need folding. When I finally got her to speak, she told me Margot had pulled her aside like she was disciplining a child, reminding her, in that calm, cutting voice of hers, exactly where the line was. Know your place and keep your daughter in hers. 11 years of loyalty, reduced to a warning. Something in me shifted that night, a quiet, burning kind of anger I didn't recognize in myself. I confronted Margot myself, foolishly believing reason might work on a woman who had never needed to reason with anyone in her life. She met me in the hallway outside Callan's study, arms crossed, eyes like frozen glass. "You will never be one of us," she told me, each word measured, deliberate, meant to cut deep. I didn't cry. I refused to give her that, but I felt it, the sting of being told so plainly that my love was a trespass. Callan found out, and for the first time, he didn't stay silent. He stood beside me in front of his mother, told her plainly that his heart wasn't hers to arrange like a business merger. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like striking a match near dry wood. Because Margot didn't retreat. She regrouped. Rumors started circulating. Quiet, poisonous whispers that I was chasing his money, that my mother had raised me to climb. Della's position in the household grew tense, her job suddenly under scrutiny for the first time in over a decade. I watched the walls closing in around us, slow and deliberate, and I understood with a sinking certainty that Margot wasn't simply protecting her son. She was preparing for war, and she intended to win it in public, where humiliation would cut the deepest. The invitation came wrapped in gold lettering, elegant and cold, like everything else Margot touched. An engagement gala, she called it. I should have known then. I should have felt the warning in my bones. But Callan asked me to come, and some foolish, hopeful part of me still believed love might be enough to survive one night in that house. I remember the dress my mother helped me choose, her fingers steady even though I could see the worry behind her eyes. I remember walking into that ballroom, chandeliers throwing gold light across marble floors, 50 guests in silk and diamonds, and Callan's hand finding mine like a promise. For one moment, I let myself believe we were safe. Then, Margot took the microphone. She didn't hesitate. She didn't blink. She stood in front of everyone we knew and announced Callan's engagement to Priscilla Vane, a contract signed years ago by his late father, tying his future to a business alliance neither of us had ever been told about. I watched Callan's face drain of color, watched him realize in real time that his own life had been decided without him. It wasn't his betrayal, but it felt like one anyway, the ground disappearing beneath me in front of everyone I knew. Before I could even process it, Margot turned to me. She said my mother's name like it was something dirty. She called her hired help who forgot her place, said I was raised to chase what didn't belong to me. The room went silent, 50 pairs of eyes turning toward us, phones quietly rising to capture what was coming. My mother stepped forward, just to defend me, just to say one word, and Margot slapped her. The sound of it echoed through that ballroom louder than anything I'd ever heard. Della's head turned sharply, her hand rising slowly to her cheek, disbelief and humiliation written across a face that had endured 11 years of quiet dignity. Gasps rippled through the crowd, someone's glass shattered against the floor, and I felt something inside me break clean in half. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply took my mother's hand and walked her out of that house, past every whispering guest, past Callan calling my name, past the life I thought we were building together. I shut the car door on his voice and didn't look back. The drive home was silent, except for my mother's breathing, shaky and broken in a way I'd never witnessed before. When we finally got inside, she collapsed onto the couch and wept. Not just from the slap, but from 11 years of swallowed pride finally spilling out at once. I held her that night and made a vow I intended to keep. Margot wanted a war. She was about to get one. Grief has a strange way of turning into fuel. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my mother's kitchen table with her old employment records spread in front of me, papers I'd never had reason to look at before. Somewhere between rage and heartbreak, a colder, clearer part of my mind woke up. If Margot wanted to fight dirty, she'd taught me exactly how. It started with a name I recognized from years of overhearing conversations I wasn't supposed to hear, a charity foundation set up in memory of Callan's late father, meant to fund scholarships for underprivileged families, families like mine, ironically. I remembered whispers from other staff, comments quickly hushed whenever Margot entered a room. So I started asking quiet questions, calling old contacts, following threads that led me somewhere I hadn't expected. What I found wasn't rumor, it was documentation, years of transfers, quietly siphoned from the foundation into private accounts under Margot's name. I didn't run to expose her right away. I'd learned enough from watching her to know that timing was everything, and a woman like Margot needed to be cornered publicly, with no room to twist her way out. While I gathered what I needed, Callan came looking for me. I almost didn't answer the door, but when I did, I saw a man who looked like he hadn't slept either, eyes rimmed red, voice breaking as he told me he'd confronted his mother the moment I left that gala. He hadn't known about the contract. He refused to marry Priscilla, told his mother plainly that his life wasn't hers to sell. Their fight, he said, had been the loudest their house had ever heard, years of resentment finally erupting between them. For the first time, I saw Callan choose me out loud, in front of the only person's approval he'd spent his whole life chasing. That gave me the courage to finish what I'd started. I brought everything I'd found to his father's old lawyer, a man who still believed in the foundation's original purpose. Together, we presented the evidence to the family board, bank statements, transfer records, signatures that couldn't be explained away. I watched Margot's face during that meeting, the same icy composure she always wore, slowly cracking beneath questions she couldn't answer. The board didn't hesitate. They stripped her of control over the trust that same afternoon, and then the world outside caught up with her too. Someone had filmed the slap at the gala, and it had already been circulating quietly online. Paired now with whispers of the embezzlement scandal, it spread faster than she could contain. Reporters called. Old friends distanced themselves. The woman who once controlled every room she entered was suddenly powerless in front of the one audience she never expected to answer to, the public. I didn't feel triumphant watching it unfold. I felt something quieter, steadier, justice finally catching up to cruelty. The board meeting that stripped Margot of her control wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of her unraveling, and I watched it happen slowly, piece by piece, the way ice cracks before it finally breaks. The scandal spread further than any of us anticipated. Business partners who once fought for a seat at her table suddenly stopped returning her calls. Friends who'd sipped champagne beside her at countless galas quietly distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a name now whispered alongside words like fraud and disgrace. The video of the slap resurfaced everywhere, replayed beside headlines about the missing charity funds, and the public didn't need much convincing about who Margot Ashworth really was beneath the pearls and perfect posture. I didn't ask for an apology. I never expected one. But it came anyway. In a boardroom full of people who once feared her, Margot's voice barely steady as she turned to my mother and said the words I imagine she never thought she'd have to say. "I'm sorry." My mother didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice or remind Margot of 11 years of quiet humiliation. She simply looked at her and said, "Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn." And in that single sentence, I watched my mother reclaim every ounce of dignity that house had ever tried to take from her. Callan chose me fully after that, not out of rebellion or spite toward his mother, but because for the first time in his life, his choices were finally his own. There was no contract, no expectation, no shadow standing between us, just two people who had survived a war neither of us started. Months later, I walked through the same halls my mother used to clean, holding her arm, both of us dressed not as help, but as guests, welcomed rather than tolerated. I watched her eyes take in the marble floors, the chandeliers, the life she'd given everything to provide me a glimpse of, and I saw something settle in her expression. Peace, maybe, or vindication. Margot was there too, seated quietly in a corner, stripped of her former power, watching from a distance the very world she once ruled without question. She didn't approach us, she simply watched, and for the first time, I saw something unfamiliar in her expression: humility. The war she declared the night she slapped my mother in front of 50 guests was a war she never actually won, because cruelty, no matter how elegant its disguise, always meets its reckoning eventually. And as I stood there, watching my mother laugh softly at something Callan said, I finally understood something I'll carry with me forever. True power was never in Margot's money or her name. It was in the dignity my mother carried even when she had nothing left to hold on to. Some people mistake cruelty for control, but karma doesn't forget, and respect always finds its way back to those who deserve it. True power was never in Margot's money or her name. It was in the dignity my mother carried even when she had nothing left to hold on to. Some people mistake cruelty for control, but karma doesn't forget, and respect always finds its way back to those who deserve it.